It's not a bad shout, is it? Anyway, hello everyone. So today, I'm sure you all know, is about attacking Active Directory 101. I've tried to make this talk a bit more user-friendly and a little bit more suited for everyone in the audience. As I know, everyone's not a pen tester, so some of this may be new. I know some pen testers in the audience, looking at you, that probably already know this, so it's probably very new to you, maybe a little bit of a refresher. But yeah, I've just tried to make this talk a bit more user-friendly. I might start a series. I'll talk more about that in a sec. Next slide, please, Jess. So yeah, who I am, my name is Daniel Little. I've been a senior pen tester at Clarinet now for 2 years. Been in the pen testing industry for about 7, going on 8. That's flown by. Mainly been in offensive security all that time. Well, yeah, all that time actually. I've not done anything else apart from be a sysadmin and network engineer for a year at a time. I do a lot of home labbing at home. So I run my own Proxmox clusters. I host a lot of web services. I try and run a lot of home AI stuff, much to my wife's dismay. That hates me when I take Alexa, turn on the lights, and she goes, I can't find a group or device named Light. And she's like, can I just have the switch back? And I'm like, no. But here we are. I do data hoarding, so I collect a lot of data. I do a lot of help with the Internet Archive. I donate to that. I run a lot of warriors for them, so I make sure we can all find our stuff, even when that blog post that you need to fix something is still there 20 years later. I do a lot of sysadmin cosplaying, so I do, as much as I'm in cybersecurity and do pen testing, I do actually like hosting things and creating things and plugging things in together and having a go at that. I was going to put out a 3D printing guy, but I've only just bought one like 2 months ago, and I've only just set it up last weekend. And if you want to chat to me about that after, let me know. Next slide, please. Okay. Keep going. Disclaimer, so there's a lot to Active Directory. It's a huge topic. I could stand here until Christmas 2028 and still be talking about it. There's a lot to cover in just a short space of time, much to my dismay of just starting late, but it's okay. I'm no expert in AD. I've always interested in Windows Active Directory since I was at university, but I do a lot of pen testing. I don't just do Active Directory. I do web application, databasing, Wi-Fi, red teaming, mobile app stuff, everything that's under the sun, really. But I'd like to make this talk a bit of a series if you guys are actually interested or want to learn more. So we will talk on some subjects now. I've pushed this talk to my GitHub, which I've linked to the Discord channel, if anyone wants to have a look at it later. And I'd love to do like a 102 series and a 103, maybe it's 105, about different types of attacks and hybrid AD and things like that. As you can already tell, I talk rapidly fast, so if you need me to, I'll slow down. We have a lot to cover today. So yeah, so obviously what we covered today is a brief talk about Windows Active Directory, Active Directory main components, what do we look for when we're attacking Active Directory, tools used to enumerate it. I found when I was starting out that there was so many tools out there that I just didn't know where to start and very much got confused quite quickly and started using the wrong tools in wrong places. Obviously talk about tools that are used to attack it as well. Common quick wins and common misconfigurations for you sysadmins and pen testers who are just starting out. So how do you get DA really quick? I think everyone's had a race. My mate Tom and me have lots to talk about. How quick can you get DA? Someone I think we both worked with did DA in 5 minutes within the car park over the public Wi-Fi. And what can blue teams do to make my life a living hell? Next slide, please, Jess. Keep going. So just want to put a little disclaimer in, which is the next slide actually, but this one's about what will not be covered today. So we're not talking about hybrid AD. So I know a lot of the past 5 years, Azure's been a big thing, AWS. We're not going to talk about that sort of area just yet. Mostly focus on internal network setups, so stuff that's pretty commonplace still to this day, even with the push to the cloud. A lot of people are actually coming back on-prem, I've noticed, but it's a lot of like a seesaw ride, I guess. We won't be talking about red team Active Directory, so a lot of these tools won't be, they can be used in red teaming, but because of how loud they are, they won't necessarily be used in red teaming engagements. A lot of red teaming is living off the land or social engineering is in place and a lot of other things there. Not going to talk about too many multi-domain, multi-forest attacks in this talk. As I say, a lot to talk about in such a short space of time. I won't be talking about multi-chained attacks either, where you chain, say, 4 or 5 exploits together to breach DA and AD certificates and all that jazz. I advise you all to do your own research. As I say, this talk, take the slides at home, have a research. If something you want to research that later in your own time, then by all means, I encourage it. Next slide. So what is Active Directory? We've all used it. If we used it in school, we've used it at work, much to our dismay. Yes, you've used it at work. Everyone does. It's the, it's the end of, it's business for Windows basically, or Windows for business, sorry. It was released in 1990 along with Windows Server 2000. 1999, sorry, that's not right. So Windows Server 2000 was released, and that was the first time it was out. It is a directory service that was incorporated by Microsoft when they found that back in Regminton, where the Microsoft OS was, that they had lots of testing machines. And Windows DOS and 90 and 3.1 was scaling at quite a large speed. So XP came out and Microsoft stock really blew up. So they needed a way to sell this product to businesses, but at a way that it was easily manageable rather than running over to say user 10 had a problem and then user 200 down, like in another campus, had another problem. They needed a way to organize all this and scale at size, really. So that's where Active Directory came along. It's a tool that's used these days to manage users, manage computers. So again, if you take your user account and you log in at, say, floor B, you can go into another floor or another building that's on the same domain in Active Directory and log in there. So you haven't got to take that system with you. It's a great way for admins as well to manage people's user access. If configured correctly, it can be very secure, but because it's so large and so much going on, very easy to get wrong and very easy for admins to come and go, where admin A may have done something really cool and developed this tool that still runs, but then admin D is like, it works, but I don't know why it works, and I have no idea who wrote this, so I can't speak to them. So it can get very misconfigured, and that's where the security of us comes in. It also offers multiple network services. Back in the day, it didn't do so much. You used to have your own dedicated DHCP server and your own dedicated mail server. But because Microsoft got so big, started developing its own, well, incorporating DHCP, DNS, SMTP into the domain controller itself and user authentication and things like that. Next slide. So this is an image I nicked off Google. Best one I could find that really, before designing my own. At the top, you've got the domains. That's typically the domain name itself. Then you've got all the administrating groups. So obviously you've got people here. Then you've got obviously your own servers. So at the end of the day, the Active Directory itself is kind of like its own phone book, if you will. So you've got servers in there, you've got printers, you've got network shares, NFS, SMB shares, Samba shares, all sorts of that, all incorporated into one large domain. So, and I'll just touch on Forest real quick. So that's one single domain. So when you've got other businesses that buy other businesses and they slap their AD into that, you can have like what's called a multi-forest. So that domain can talk to another domain as long as the group policy is all there and everything's set up correctly. And that's another issue in itself, but another talk for another time. Next slide, please. Yeah. So yeah, I'll just talk about the types of user accounts that I found in Active Directory. So you have your standard user account. This could be someone in sales. This could be someone in HR. This could be someone in business development role and things like that. So everyone will get given that. So you won't have by good design, you shouldn't have local admin with this account. You shouldn't have the ability to make changes. You should just have the ability to do your own, what's the word I'm looking for? Your own kind of what you should for work, right? You shouldn't be able to make any change or install any software. I have seen cases where user local groups are actually in the local admin group, which is terrible. Great for me, but terrible for them. Then you have your local administrator account. So I didn't want to touch on RIDs and SIDs just yet, but this is obviously a SID 500. So local administrator account will never be locked out. So it's a guaranteed access way of never locking out a machine. But it should be secure enough. In an Active Directory environment, local admin shouldn't really be enabled. It should just be domain admins that can log in. But local admin have SIN in place for when things go terribly wrong and you need to reset the machine or roll back a configuration. I'll briefly touch on service accounts. So service accounts are accounts within within Windows Active Directory that are tied to a database or tied to a Kerberos thing. So you might see, if you've done an Nmap scanner anytime soon, you'll see KRBT account. That's a service principal account. And you also have guest accounts. These typically should be disabled, but are a great way of we'll get into this shortly, but there's a great way of using guest accounts and leveraging their low priv to enumerate information from systems. So what is the domain Active Directory? So this is the name of an organization. So you may work at, I don't know, Yahoo at yourself. It's typically spelt with like d.little@domain. I've always personally struggled at finding usernames. Say I've scraped LinkedIn for a certain organization when trying to find valid user accounts in an Active Directory domain. Finding out the formatting of that. So there's plenty of tools on my GitHub, which I've linked to as well, that you can find and take that scrape list of OSINT from LinkedIn and import it into this tool, and it will give you like a guest estimate of like user accounts, which we'll get into a minute, how you can validate those. A domain is a single tree though, so again, as I mentioned briefly in that image previously, you can see that there's one image there, one single domain, a single tree, but you can have multiple domains, and I've seen it before where you can have up to 60, which is quite interesting. Just stating the technologies found in AD. Typically these days, you'd only see Windows Server 2016 to 2025 is coming out soon, or at least in beta. Windows 10 is going away. It's coming in the ending soon, about 2 years. Windows 11 should be popping up more and more. I have seen that more and more. I thought I'd list some of the more common ports that you see in a Microsoft AD environment. So you've got SMB, Service Messaging Block 445. That can still appear on Linux. LDAP, again, this is lightweight directory access protocol. Can still see that on Linux, but it's used more typically within domain controllers. Kerberos, which is one of my favorite ports to play with when I'm on an AD test. But again, that's typically used, well, only really ever used in Windows environments. That's used for authentication through ticket granting ticket systems, which are a whole other talk in itself, but I will touch briefly on it when we get into it. NetBIOS 137 to 139 is TCP. When you find that, you pretty much know you're attacking a Windows box. RPC, I thought I'd touch on this. It's a remote procedure call. So dynamic range is from 49 to 50, basically a very large. When you do an mmap on a box, on a Windows box, and you do a full mmap scan, you'll see like the common ports from 100 to 1000. And if you do like a full scan, you'll see lots of like 4,900. So when I first saw this, when I was first starting out, I was like, what is this? But it's actually just used for communication between clients. So a user won't use it, but basically when you're sending data from one end to another, an RPC client can actually communicate on that transit point. Windows servers, they make up a good chunk of the AD environment, and typically what we kind of go for are the hosts, because hosts can go offline when people go home and go off the Wi-Fi and they can walk off site. So if your target just grows legs and walks off, not great. So we go for servers. While Server 2016 is supported, there is a lot of other servers still floating about. I've never actually seen NT in any environment I've worked in, probably before my time, but I've seen 2000 all the way up to current day. I've seen 2008 still floating about this year actually, which shocked me, but you know, got to keep those old software still going. If you find that, obviously it's an instant critical. I do recommend having a look and seeing if it's been patched for any of the more common exploits like Bluekeep and things. Be warned, things like that can break the box. But MS1710, when I first started out testing, which is, I'm sure we all know, is Eternal Blue suite. Very great kind of exploit, really interesting to work with at the time, but it's kind of fading out, which is good to see from a security perspective anyway. Next slide, please, Jess. Windows hosts, I didn't want to list all the Windows hosts, but again, Windows Perm support is ending. That's for everyone who runs Windows 10 still. Make sure you update to Windows 11 if you can, or at least move to Linux. Maybe the year of the desktop, who knows. We'll still see Windows XP floating about. I see so is Pack 3. I've seen Vista once, which was very interesting. But you still see 7 floating about in embedded systems and things. So it's worth checking to make sure when you map the network, which we'll get into in a minute. So just what I talk about SMB port. This was a very obviously interesting port of MS1710, which I already mentioned, but basically it's a server messaging block that servers use to communicate and send files back and forth. So you'll see this on Linux Samba hosts as well, not just purely on Windows, but it's a very common port when you see in Windows environments. It's a very helpful port to identify and enumerate because it can perform SMB versioning, which we'll get into a tool which we'll use shortly to identify those. But you can find what I often do is get a list of IP addresses that are in scope, scan that with SMB versioning, with NetExec or Metasploit have a module for it, I think SMB version enum, that you can scan for the SMB versions and you can find like where your low-hanging fruit is very quickly in an environment. So SMB is a great port to have in. Common misconfigurations I see, which people tend to overlook because it's rated as medium, is no signing and null sessions. So with no signing, you're able to kind of log in quite easily. With null sessions as well, you can log in with just not even the user. You just put 2 ticks in the command and away you go. You haven't got to supply a guest or anything like that, which is really quite cool. That can provide you lots of information such as I'm trying to think, sorry, lots of shares or any accessible shares. Sometimes it's a share with no, you can't write to it, but you can read it. Sometimes there's important information in those shares that can help you gain further access. I don't know too much about LDAP, I'll be honest with you. I know the only time I've really ever used LDAP is when I've come to enumerate kind of users from a large domain, but I'll briefly talk about it here. So it's a lightweight directory access protocol. It's used by, from my understanding, programs to quickly query things within an Active Directory database, so and getting usernames and things like that, or finding if this application belongs to this service principal account or things like that. So it can be commonly misconfigured. I've not really done too much with it, as I say, but I've been able to get users from there and pull quite a lot of information. You won't be getting a shell from this, from my understanding, but you can definitely get quite a lot of useful information which can be used later on down in further attacks. I recommend running TLS over this to prevent any kind of, by default it's unencrypted, so I recommend running TLS over it. And please enable LDAP signing, because that makes my life a lot harder as well. Kerberos, so I could do a whole 2-hour talk on Kerberos. So Kerberos is based on the three-headed dragon. I've tried to put in a very brief photo of Kerberos the ticket granting system through the KDC, for the user. So Kerberosing is now the kind of default authentication method used by Active Directory. This is where a user is able to prove to themselves, to the KDC, which is the DC typically, that they are who they say they are. They haven't got to keep re-authenticating their password every 5 minutes when they want to access things. And basically, depending on the user privilege that they have access to by the domain controller, which is set, that's what they get given access to. So for example, if a user authenticates to a database that I need access to, it prevents its ticket. It's a whole thing. I recommend, there's a great course online about it. If you want to message me about it, you're more than welcome. But it's a key component in AD authentication. There's a lot of attacks that you can do here. I won't go into it too much. It works, as I say, it works off a ticket-based system, proves who they are. It's current standard within AD security. It replaces NTLM and NTLM v2 authentication, though if Kerberosing for whatever reason fails, NTLM v2 does kick in as a kind of backup. Uses AES encryption, which is a lot stronger than other types of encryption out there at the moment. It can still be attacked, which I might do on Series 102. I might do a talk on really deep diving Kerberosing, because I feel like even I don't fully understand it to its full level of degree at the moment. I know there's like ASREC roasting and Kerberosing attacks that you can play out, but I've seen some really cool magical stuff, I'd say, on Twitter, being pulled out apart with Kerberosing, what you can do. I'll just talk about NetBIOS. So network basic input and output system. This is a network service that enables applications obviously on the same network and also across different VLANs and other layer 3 and layer 4 networks to talk to each other. There's not many vulnerabilities affecting NetBIOS from my research. I know MSO867 was a big player, but also needed SMB as well. So, but again, lots of information can be gathered here. My point of this is that even though we're not looking straight to get a shell, pen testing is a lot about enumerating, a lot about understanding where you are. I see it kind of attacking as a chessboard. So where you're standing is how much information can I gather about where my surroundings are? Because you start off in a dark tunnel, you don't know what's out there. So you want to start feeling around the walls and feeling around where you are. So good tool to use for NetBIOS enumeration is MBT scan. That can give you the computer name, that can give you the domain name scheme. Really helpful when you come to username scheme as well. mmap and MB lookup are great tools to enumerate NetBIOS. All come in default and Caliph, I believe. I wanted to briefly touch on RPC port, so remote procedure call, which I've already spoken about. As I've already said about that, sorry. The enumerating this port can be done with the mmap scripting engine, so that can give you out all the usernames sometimes if it's defaultly misconfigured insecure. You can do a lot with RPC. I did a box recently on Hack the Box, where you was able to basically pull out with MBT scan, not MBT, sorry. You're able to pull out with Elam for Linux and G all the usernames through an RPC client. As you can, I was hoping that image would be better, but basically that is running RPC enumeration method through Elam for Linux and G, and you can pull out all the usernames, which is fantastically helpful when you come to do a bit more of the next step, and it's hacking. I love password hacking. I'm a big fan of Hashcat, not so much a fan of John. John has its place, but I much prefer Hashcat. And when you come to attacking AD, you'll be using Hashcat a lot, especially with hashes. So I'll just go over briefly the types of hashes you'll see. This is not a definitive list, but is typically what you'll see. So you'll see an NTLM hash, which is also known as an NT hash. This is not as common. This is one of the most common, the most common type of AD hash you'll see. There's two types: there's NTLM v1, and NTLM v2. So I guess 3 types, sorry, but. NTLM and NTLM v1 can be passed, so that's a thing. So that password is encrypted via the AD in a response. So you can take that hash, you haven't got to crack it, you can relay it back to any other machine, and it will basically pass the hash attack. NTLM v2, on the other hand, is not passable, but can be captured and cracked offline if it's a weak password, which I've seen even domain admins have weak NTLM v2s. You can crack their password and gain access to their account, which is really helpful. Thank you for that. LM hashes, so these are older and weaker hashes no longer used. You see them typically in Windows Server 2012 and below. Easy to crack, easy to pass. I won't get into why they're too easy to crack, but basically they have a single, like, I think it's an 8-bit or 12-bit character limit. So you can't, even if you put a 20 character password in it, only take the first 12 characters and hash it. Kerberos hashes, so Kerberos hashes sometimes we found when you're able to do Kerberosing attacks, and you're able to crack those, again, offline, but you're not able to pass them either. And just a quick note as well on the NT hash, they are found in the nts.dit file. So if you don't know what the nts.dit file is it's a database of passwords stored within in the domain controller of Windows Active Directory. And if you're able to get access to it, which you do need domain admin to do, it's always nice to do, is grab that file, download it locally, extract the hashes using an in-packet library, and away you go with the Hashcat and crack it. I could do a whole talk on password hacking. Yeah.
Question.
Yes, please, go for it.
The NT hash, is it a logical assumption to assume that it came out with Windows NT?
Yeah, absolutely. No, good question. Please talk up. I don't want to talk like I'm talking to a tin can. Tools used to enumerate active AD. So I just thought I'd give you a quick rundown of what tools I typically use. And there's more to it. This is not a definitive list, but this is pretty much the go-to what I would use. At least have that in my top 10 tools. So next slide, please. I'll just go into this quickly. So Nmap, I'm sure we all know Nmap, whether we work in pen testing, SOC, GRC even, I'm sure they use it there somehow. Best port scan around, in my opinion. I like what's the new one? Rustscan. I've tried to use that. It's okay. Needs a bit of work, but great scanning tool. That scans networks quickly or slowly. If you're scanning multiple /8s though, I do recommend MassScan, which is based off Nmap anyway, just faster. Nmap's got a lot of scripts built into it using the NSE engine. So a lot of scripts for enumerating RPC ports, a lot of scripts for enumerating SMB ports. It's a really kind of all-in-one tool. It can't get you obviously remote code execution or start pulling hashes for you, but it's probably my go-to tool for scanning an Active Directory. One of the first things I think any tester runs is an Nmap scan as soon as they land on the network. Enum for Linux, I first came across Enum for Linux before it was NG. This was back when I was a junior. It was a great tool back then, but for some reason broke and then someone remade it. I'm sure you can find that on GitHub. I'm bad with names, so sorry whoever developed that, but thank you. It's a great tool for enumerating Windows systems and Samba systems. It can make use of as I said previously in the SMB slide, SMB null session. So you do a -A and then -U, tick, -P, tick, and it can perform quite a lot of very helpful enumeration, such as password policy enumeration, user enumeration, shares, so much stuff. I did a box with Tom here a couple months ago where Enum for Linux NG with a null share session enabled pretty much solved the box for us pretty quickly. Found the Samba shares that had read and write access, and we had a low privilege shell within 10 minutes. It was a great time. But even more powerful capture credentials. So the more, obviously, once you get a single foothold, if you will, the kind of boat starts sinking even faster than before that you had no credentials. In-packet, again, I could talk about in-packet for ages. So in-packet took me a while to understand. When I first heard of in-packet, I thought it was I thought it was a single tool. But now that I spent a lot of time with it, a couple of years, about 5-6 years ago now, I realized that it was a packet Python library. So you can develop with in-packet and you can add your own packet examples. But it has so many tools that are used for attacking AD, not just limited to AD, it also has some tools for Linux, but where it has a lot of really kind of helpful, quick example scripts to help you get, like once you've got credentials, or even like start curve roasting or performing ASREP roasting attacks. In-packet's got a library for you. There's a lot of guides online to how to use this very valuable kind of tool. My favorite one is PSSX.py though, because once I've got a user and I want to get some form of shell on their system, either via PowerShell or CMD, you can use PSSX.py. Get users SPNs is a great way to find service principal names. I don't want to go too dive into service principal names, but please Google that if you want to know more. They are associated with normal user accounts, but There are so many more tools like this though that are in packet. I really recommend that if there's any tool you do look at, apart from maybe one of the other ones I'm going to speak about, check out this one. Next slide, please. Thank you. And speaking of that tool, is honestly my current favourite tool at the moment. It's called NetExec. It's a remake of Crack Map Exec. It's got me to use a DA from non-user to DA so many times. It's one of the tools where it kind of does everything. It's got FTP protocol enabled, SMB. I'm trying to remember all the ones it does do. SSH, it does everything. You're able to find out SMB versioning. You're able to perform password spraying with it. You can even pull on, if you've got domain admin, you can even pull on the nts.dit file remotely.
Hashing spraying?
Yeah, it does pass the hash, everything.
What session spraying, sorry?
Sorry, it's password spraying. Not session spraying, sorry, my voice. Password spraying, so it does password spraying like across. So if you've got a list of users and you want to know the passwords, say your password 1, for example, you can take that user list within NetExec, add it, give it the password, and give it a list of IP addresses you want to spray, or a single IP, and it will spray across the whole account. Don't get me wrong, you've got to worry about account lockout when you do that and things, but it's I think one of the best tools I've ever come across. So I'm really impressed with it. I'd actually sponsor them if they allowed it. It's a fantastic tool. I recommend everyone have a look at this if you're coming across pen testing AD. Now Bloodhound, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Bloodhound. When I first started using Bloodhound, it was a pain to set up and it was a pain to get the ingesters to work. They have released a recent community edition to make setting up Bloodhound really easy, especially in Docker, which I recommend you shove it in because dealing with different Python libraries with Bloodhound can be a pain. Getting the ingester to work as well once you've got a foothold. So this tool, just to preempt it, isn't a tool that you would use from the enumeration stage. It would be a tool that you would use once you've got a user account that's valid. So once you've got a user account and you've got a shell that's active, you can take the Bloodhound ingester. So Bloodhound's got 2 parts, sorry, let me just go back a sec. So Bloodhound's got 2 parts. You've got the database that you load on your local machine, then you've got the ingester that goes onto that, onto your main machine, onto the infected machine, or on your compromised machine, that's what I'm looking for. Thank you. Compromised machine, and then take it from there. You put the ingest on the compromised machine, it goes out, collects data. Very loud. Don't do this on a red team. SOCs will find you within seconds. But if you run a pen test and you want to map out the AD, it's a really good tool of finding a way, mapping out the Active Directory environment and also finding a way to Prevesk and very quickly Prevesk in those sorts of environments and different pathways. So you may find a way that the user account you've got access to may not have direct access to a domain admin account, but this other account that this does, so you can laterally move. Really good tool. And obviously you can't, got to mention Responder. So this does LMNR, NTBS, and NS, and MDM, NS poisoning. So basically it's like a man in the middle. So you'll spin up your Kali machine on the network, hit Responder, very easy tool to use, and you start listening. So by default, Active Directory actually has LMNR, you can read that if you like, but has LMNR link multicast name resolution on by default. And when DNS fails, it will use NTLM vhash. So basically Responder exploits these by sending out negative queries to other machines on the network, or will send out poison requests, hoping that the user it's sent it to will respond back with its NTLM v2 hash. I've actually seen clear text credentials sent between networks with this tool, so you don't always actually have to crack the hash. I can't tell you the story, but there's a great way of, I didn't believe it was, because sometimes this also does FTP. So you get FTP, when you're running Nessus alongside this, sometimes Nessus will get picked up if you need that much time, and you haven't got that much time in an assessment. So you've got to ignore those. But I saw this single kind of clear text password, and I was like, that doesn't seem like Nessus. So, started relaying it. Again, went to NetExec and just tried it on the system, and it worked. It was a local admin account. Sorry, go back, is that Chris? Jess, sorry. So once you've got that, once you've got that hash, obviously that's not the end of it. So you've got to take that hash, and hopefully it's weak and you can crack it. There's been times where I've been able to get an admin hash, and I'm like, yes! And that soon becomes because they've got a really strong passive policy, which is great for the client. Bad for me, because I haven't got 10 days or 10 weeks to crack their password. I've got 2 days or 3 days. So, while it's great to have a strong password where your password's going to get cracked like that, a real attacker, if they was able to grab that, is going to spend months, if not a year, cracking that password. Now, depending on your passive policy, that hash may become useless once your password gets refreshed. But if you don't have a passive policy and it stays like that, then well, the attacker can keep going at it. So it's a really cool way. It's been, I think, one of my first proper ways I've ever got DA on an assessment. Back when I was about 2 years in, I was really chuffed with it.
What does DA mean?
So sorry, DA, yes, sorry, I keep saying this. So DA stands for domain admin. So domain admin is the highest privilege you can get in Active Directory. I should have mentioned that previously in the username slide. My apologies. I'll edit that. So DA is basically the domain admin account. So it's kind of crown jewel, what you want. Obviously, in a pen test, it's not the only thing you should go for. I do tell my juniors this. I say, guys, like, while getting DA is great and quite thrilling, if you will, it's not the end all. You're there to assess the network security standards and look for other kind of breadcrumbs, if you will, in the network. But I just thought I'd base this talk on how to enumerate DA, really. Yeah. Hashcat, I spoke briefly of Hashcats. Hashcat's a great tool. It can crack many hashes. It's not just limited to Active Directory. You can use it in web application testing for cracking MD5 hashes and other kind of like other kind of hashes you might find in JWT and things like that. But that's a different talk for a different day. I recommend a strong GPU if you can, 60 range or higher. Some password lists I've mentioned there are good places to start with. If you want to go on my GitHub again, there's like a GitHub plug here. But if you want to go on my GitHub again, there's a whole like star list of password places I look for and things like that. Next slide. Quick, easy wins. So I thought I'd just briefly mention about quick ways of getting either information or quick ways to get some form of foothold with an Active Directory network. So SMB null sessions are a great place to start enumerating, great place, I've said before many times, great place to start getting some information from systems, what type of Windows servers are there. Look out for old Windows servers and old Windows hosts. Maybe there's an old CVE someone forgot to patch that's sitting in a cupboard or under someone's desk somewhere. Not many these days that I've seen past since 2020 have there been any kind of really quick RC exploits like MS17010. There's been Bluekey, but Bluekey's been a bit... I've never wanted to run it on a client's network because it has the trouble of maybe blue screening the device, and I don't want to explain to the client why their DC is dead. If you guys want to, by all means. But yeah, look for weak passwords. As I say, password spraying. Some clients don't like you doing this, but some clients don't mind. If say their account lockout policy is 5, you can have 2 quick attempts if you think you know what their password policy is and can guess what, maybe a bit of psychology there, guessing work, but maybe what their weak password or someone might pick. You'd be shocked what comes up in a password audit. OSINT. So when I do an Active Directory test, I don't just limit myself to what's on the network. I go a little bit outside in terms of finding out what's on the internet through like their LinkedIn profile. Is there any weak names? What's the name of the HR lady or the HR person? Sorry. Is there, sometimes their password's weak. Trying to go for the non-techies to get a foothold because technical people do think, oh, I know this is important. Where the people who it's just a job at the end of the day. I just want to go home and feed my cat. Don't really care what their password is. Yeah, I don't know what the cat name. I can probably find it if I'm not that great at OSINT, but it's not hard to Google the company. Absolutely, yeah. Go for the crazy cat lady. Again, I mentioned element R poisoning through Responder. Again, a great way of doing it. And sometimes a client does have it turned off. Sometimes a client doesn't. Really depends. But it's a quick, easy win. I'll mention a little bit, asset roasting and Kerberos. These require some usernames if you are to get anywhere with them, and valid usernames at that, but I'll maybe talk about that more next time if you guys want.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. What can blue teams do? So ensure SMB signing is enabled. I can't tell you how many times on a test I at least see like 10 servers with SMB signing disabled. I don't know why. Please turn it on. Turn them off LMNR in group policy. That's what GPO means. Ensure a strong password policy. I can't tell you the amount of times where passwords I've been able to get hashes, which is fun, but then I'm spending a whole assessment praying that Hashcat finds it. So ensure a good strong password policy. That's what you can do. I might do some more research on what you guys can do. I can speak to my SOC at work and we can come up with a plan. That'd be maybe cool. Release some more information. I didn't put an ending slide, but there you go. Any questions? 25 minutes, not too bad. Yeah.
Gosh.
Any questions?
Any questions, guys?
Go on.
So you mentioned that DA was the pinnacle. What about enterprise admin?
Well, that's a bit beyond that scope of this talk, you say. And, I knew you was gonna. You're not recording. You stop recording, right? Stop recording for a sec.
What was it?
Anyone else? Yeah, go on.
You mentioned
Blue key.
Blue Keep, sorry, Blue Keep. I didn't want to go too much in vulnerabilities, so again, because people a lot. So Blue Keep is an exploit is out in 2020, 2021. It exploits RDP within. It does some. I think it's some form of buffer overflow, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a buffer overflow. So while it can lead to remote code execution on the data center or on any sort of system that's vulnerable to it, it can, because it's a buffer overflow in memory, can cause the system to blue screen. That's why it's called Blue Keep. So I've run it in a lab and I've had 7 out of 10. Yeah, it's not been great. It's not something I'd feel comfortable using in a, because when you're on a client site, obviously there's some form of professionalism. When you're in a lab, if you break it, you just, I don't know, you reboot it. It's not, who's going to care really?
Almost every time that I've tried to do anything,
Yeah. The amount of times I see some like,
you don't, as soon as you see something like that, you don't exploit it because you know that it's going to.
you'll report to the client that the patch is missing. That's generally what I do. That's a kind of standard practice. Go look, or if they're happy for you, go for it. But I would always ask and say, look, give it and highlight to them that look, this can break it. So they don't. You don't ever want to run stuff and break things, and then the client's running over to your desk, and you're like, they're going to rugby tackle me and stress me out. So yeah, absolutely. Any other questions, please?
Jonathan, you had a
To be
question.
fair, if you've got pen testers in, it's going to be our fault anyway.
I've been blamed for the car parking meter not working. I'm like, that isn't even on the network.
How often do you see the bad practice of a network administrator, domain admin or enterprise admin, normally domain admin, that will have logged on locally to a client workstation to set it up, then cache in the profile, and obviously it's a pen tester and it's not pickpocketed?
So yes, that's where. Okay, sorry, let me start again. Yes and no. So I don't know how to prevent, and this probably also my knowledge. I don't claim to know everything, but I don't know how to decache credentials. So if an admin's logged on locally and done something, and then logged off and not turned off the device or rebooted it, and left their credentials in RAM, the way to access that, you would need to have a high privilege anyway for the techniques that I know of. So I don't know of any low privilege user that could dump those credentials from RAM. So you need to load in Mimikatz or load in Kiwi or anything like that.
So you have to be local admin, regardless on the box, or have those powers. You can turn off Windows caching and reduce it right away down. So therefore, you don't cache credentials within memory at all. The issue with that though is that if you are not connected to the domain, if that device is not connected to the domain, you cannot log in. So generally, what the normal recommendation is to only cache maybe 2 credentials and reduce that right the way down. The fact that domain admins are logging onto the machine, that's an issue in the first place. What you should do is local user logs on, so that's the credentials that get cached, and then you can privilege using you authorized as an admin to do whatever you need to do on that box. That's the best.
You don't ever really want to use your DA account unless you have to. I've typically seen a lot of large enterprise networks split themselves off into like segments, where only a certain account can do a certain privileged right thing to a certain group. So it kind of like, imagine like you got a ship, for example. You got 5 containers. If one goes down, it ain't going to affect the other 4. So like what you've got, so you can kind of, rather than like if this one slot block just breaks the whole thing, so you kind of want to segment it.
I create a local admin group on the domain controller. I stick that local admin group in the local admins of the workstation, so then I've got a user that I can put into that group and I can change and reset and lock that account.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be noted as well that cache credentials are stored with a better hashing algorithm.
I mean, if you want a pen test done, you can let me know. Happy to come help. Happy to share knowledge. If you want a guy that might not show up at night and morning, get him. If you want a guy who's professional, come here. If you want to report on time. If you want a report to actually read like a proper report.
Any more questions?
Jonathan, you had a question, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, for the younger among us who may want to play with these techniques, what's a safe way to do so?
Build your own app. So I recommend Proxmox as a hypervisor. Windows, so Microsoft provide a 90 days license for all Windows OSs. So you can spin up, snapshot them, and then reload them when the 90 days are up. There's loads of stuff online. I've go on my GitHub and you'll see It's called AD Goad. So basically, it's a vulnerable. You can import it. So vulnerable AD lab. You need a lot of RAM and a lot of memory, but you can start off slowly. So if you want to try Hack Me, well, Hack the Box has got a lot of stuff. Try Hack Me is a really good place to get started. You don't have to build your own lab, but if you want to build your own home lab as well, how I learned Active Directory was actually spinning up my own Active Directory lab, and playing as the kind of role of the sysadmin. Yep. So,
if you're an old timer with a pretty decent YouTube channel teaches you AD, there's a guy called IT Taster.
Yeah.
Worth looking at.
I follow a lot of. My partner falls asleep to technical YouTube videos every night. She hates me for it. She's like, well, she wakes up to a guy explaining Java.
Wow.
Yeah. Any other questions, please? So you can catch me after if you want to shout out.
I have a question.
Go on, Jess.
So,
what is your favorite Active Directory vulnerability?
Easiest one to do is I love 08867. That was just a nice. It's a very low old vulnerability.
Okay.
MS17 of 10 holds a place in my heart because at the time when I was like breaking into the industry and started seeing that.
Can you summarise that?
So we all know what happened to the NHS.
Yeah.
Ransomware.
WannaCry.
Thank you. I should put the name of it. WannaCry. That was a great time to be a pen tester. Just when I started becoming a junior, so that was when.
Wow.
It was I remember popping it actually, and my manager was like, "Yeah, that's it." And I was like, "Wow, I got a shell!" And it was the first ever one I did, and obviously, it's like riding a bike for your first time. But any other questions? If not, you can catch me after. I'll be here for a bit.
Yay! Thank you so much, everybody.